So guys, before the video starts, I've been having some issues with my audio. I've been doing something for the second channel, and I've been changing my audio up, and it kind of screwed up the audio for this video. It's not that bad in my opinion. It's noticeable, but it's not like I'm gonna re-record the whole thing because it would take way too long. I don't have the time to do that. So again, I hope it's not terrible for you guys. I hope you guys can kind of bear through it, but I just wanted to let you guys know that before the video starts, and I hope you guys all enjoy, as this is a favorite chapter of mine. All right, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be doing Bran VI, a Game of Thrones. I know I kind of faked you guys out a little bit. I wanted to try something different with Bran chapters because they always don't do as well as other chapter analysis, which is, you know, it makes sense. So I threw some Robb in there, and I put him a little bit in the title, so you know, you may feel clickbait, you may not. We're still going to be talking about Robb. Robb is one of the main focuses of this chapter, but it is Bran's POV, obviously. But I want to say, this is one of those chapters where I feel like it's George's perfect editing style on where to put chapters. Like, if you think about what happens in the last chapter, all that with Jon and his attack with the white, all of that stuff that was happening, it leads perfectly into this chapter, right? Because a lot of this chapter is focusing on Robb going south with his army, attacking the Lannisters. But one of the big plot points is they should be marching north, not south. And there seems like there's a lot of foreboding as to what is to come with Starks going south in this chapter. So I really want to point to this chapter really feels like the turn of the the nice story. This is where the tone and the settings start to kind of shift, where this chapter is very dark. It's very somber. It's very sad. There isn't much joy in this chapter. It's a really good chapter in that regard. It's a chapter I've actually reread within the last 2 months because of a live stream. It's one of the best chapters of this first book. It's by far, I think, Bran's best chapter of this book specifically. Let's get into Bran VI on page 568. The chapter begins with Bran seeing the Karstarks arrive, as Bran notes that they have about 300 horsemen and 2,000 foot with a drummer to lead their approach. Again, this is going to be important looking at later on why they are so important to Robb's army, but this is a significant amount of men that are being brought to Robb's cause. But this also signifies something else, that Robb has not been idle, right? If this is the last group to arrive, that means that the people have been coming in for a while. Everyone is gathering at Winterfell to presumably march south. Bran watched them approach from a guard's turret and sitting upon Hodor's shoulders and using Lewin's bronze eye. Lewin had told him that they were part Stark themselves, but Bran could not see the similarities. Again, Bran takes the Karstarks more as barbaric, as they have cloaks made of skins from bears, seals, and wolves. He even notes that their faces are more wild and fierce looking, while also noticing Rickard Karstark and his sons Eddard, Harrion, and Torrhen at the front of the column. Again, these people just don't really look like Starks. Or for Bran, it's going to be weird because in a lot of ways, the Starks themselves don't look like Starks, right? Like Bran, Robb, Rickon, Sansa, they all kind of have the Tully look, not the Stark look. So it is weird for Bran to kind of figure out what even a Stark is supposed to actually look like. But at this, Bran notes that they are the last to come again, showing what I talked about with Robb, bringing them all together after Ned's imprisonment. Bran wants nothing more but to go race among Wintertown to interact with everyone, but unfortunately he cannot because of his condition. Again, it kind of gives you a lot of Arya vibes. It's kind of what Arya likes to do. Arya likes to interact with people regardless of their station, and Bran is quite similar in that regard. But that gets us into page 569. Nice. Robb had forbid him from going, as the roads would be well worn from all the traffic, and that they had no men to swear to guard him. Again, Robb is extra careful now, right after what happened in the Wolf's Wood with the encounter with the deserters and the wildlings. Robb's not taking chances, and Bran is a very important character at this point because Robb is going to be going south. If something was to happen to Bran, the only person left to rule Winterfell would be Rickon, and Rickon is 3 going on 4. So again, Bran is a very important person right now, outside of just he's your family. But Bran said he would take Summer with him, but Robb was having none of it, telling him to stop playing the boy, and that even recently one of Bolton's men knifed one of Kerwin's men, already showing who to not trust. Again, just a nice little note, something that you don't think about on your first reread, as it's just maybe men having some disagreement. But again, the fact that it's a Bolton man probably tells you a lot. But also, we see that Robb is taking things way more seriously. I think one of the big parts of Robb's character that has been through Bran's POV this entire time is we're seeing Robb become more and more Robb the Lord. We're seeing less and less of Robb, Bran's brother, the one that can have some of those feelings and can be showing more compassion, things like that. But we also get more foreshadowing as he says Mother would skin him if he let anything happen to him. Interesting, because this is mentioned directly after one of Bolton's men knifed someone. Again, it's just a nice little nod there, but it also paints the idea of how much Catelyn cares about Bran and also her children just in general, which will also be coming into play in the next book. But Bran knew that Robb was using his lord's voice, and there would be no appeal to his decision. Bran knew it was because of the Wolf's Wood, which is probably correct, given that, again, this is a really dire situation in which Bran could have died. Bran, again, is shamed by this. He feels like he was helpless to do anything, and because of this, he's kind of mad at himself. Even Rickon would have kicked, but he was helpless again. Great writing for Bran. I will say something about Bran's character is, I think Bran, of all the Stark children outside of Rickon, have better writing in their actual characters than Bran at this point of the story. But we finally, I think in the last couple chapters with Bran, really start to get more of his personality, how getting pushed from that window has deeply affected him in the way he thinks about things. So I really enjoy the way George is able to start kind of using that here at this point. He thinks if Robb is a man grown, then so is he. He should have been able to protect himself. Again, it's this idea that Bran and people in this world have to grow up so quickly. So not only, even though we know Bran is still very young to having to worry about that stuff, he is also crippled. So it's like he shouldn't really be needing to worry about that stuff, but it's just because of how this world is and how they treat young boys and men. Bran thinks about how a year ago he would have climbed the wall regardless, and he was even good enough to beat Tommen in a fight. But in his spare time, he used again, he has like a seeing, like, telescope more or less that Lewin gave him. He has learned every banner and all of the lords and knights, which is actually quite impressive. Think about how many different banners you have to learn, how many different names you can learn. That's very impressive. But he lists off the banners of men here and notes how even the Winterfell hall was not large enough to feast them all, but he let each one of the lords dine with him every night. So again, I skipped over some stuff, but more or less Bran goes through like descriptions of all the different banners and stuff. And if you wanted to know those, I guess look them up. I'm not really going to take the time to go through all of them because this chapter is very long. But with that being said, it's also very important, I think, that Robb is very smart in the way he lets every lord, more or less, take dinner with him each night so that they can learn kind of their grievances, more of their personalities, what they want out of this war, what they want to do. It's really important because it makes all those lords feel important in their own way. It's something Robb gets from Ned. But Bran was always placed at Robb's right side. Something he noticed got weird looks, as if to say, how dare he be placed above me, as well as Bran being a cripple. Again, I think a lot of lords would look at this and go, yes, Bran is a Stark, but he's also crippled. He's not really a man, and I am also this great lord, and I have brought all these men to you, and I am not on your right side. It's one of those things. It's more of a pride thing. That's something we also see quite a lot in this chapter with a bunch of different type of characters in this chapter. But Bran asks Lewin, how many is it now? Again, asking how large is the army. And that gets us into page 570. Lewin notes that there are now 12,000 men, but it makes no difference. Bran asks how many knights, to which Lewin says there are few enough, and like he has told him 100 times, most of the North does not believe in the 7. To be anointed a knight and a sir before a name does not mean anything. These men here are no less skilled or loyal. Again, the biggest part of this that I think Bran has to realize, because again, Bran has always wanted to be a knight. His biggest person that he looks up to is Barristan. And so he puts a lot of importance on being a knight. It's very similar to Sansa, for instance. what Bran doesn't really understand is that doesn't really mean much, right? That's one of the things that we see constantly throughout this story, is that knights don't really take their vows seriously. And in a lot of ways, you actually almost can't even uphold all of them at the same time. But being a knight doesn't mean you're loyal. It doesn't mean you're skilled at arms. We've seen plenty of people that aren't either of those. And so that is what Lewin is kind of trying to tell here. Bran still wants to know how many and asks Lewin how many knights there are. Lewin says 300, and Bran says that the Karstarks are the last, and he will feast with him tonight. To which Lewin agrees, and Bran asks how much longer till they go. Again, this is important for Bran. Think about this from Bran's perspective. He's this young kid. Both of his parents are gone. One of them is in prison, and Catelyn is somewhere at this point. I don't know what their last hearing of her is. They don't mention it in this chapter. They just know that she's going to be coming back soon. So again, the most they know of her is like she's coming back north, presumably. But again, don't exactly know her own whereabouts. Robb, his older brother, is leaving. Like, all of his siblings besides Rickon are gone. Bran is feeling incredibly alone. His family is going to leave once Robb goes. Lewin says he must march soon, or else he will eat the countryside empty. They can't stay here forever, and more men are waiting to join them on the way south. Manderleys, Barrow Knights, Crannogmen, and Flints. The Riverlands are already under attack. He must move soon. And this is all correct from Lewin, right? You can't keep an army in one spot forever, right? It's going to completely destroy all the reserve foods that you've had set up from winter. And so you got to move soon. And that's one of the other biggest parts here, is that Robb doesn't have time on his side. One, Robb wants to move south as quickly as possible to get to King's Landing to save Ned. And also, two, he has to move south quickly to keep this army in line, right? To keep them all together. And so all of that's important. And Robb knows that. Bran sadly says he knows. Bran was miserable and was tired of watching, and says he will go back to the keep with Hodor. And Lewin tells him not to bother Robb. He will be busy. Bran says he isn't. He wants to go to the Godswood. And that gets us into page 571. As they begin their journey, he notes Lewin has made a new basket of sorts to strap to Hodor's back to allow Bran to move around better with Hodor instead of him carrying him. Again, this is a really nice invention, I guess, from Lewin, because what it does is it makes Bran feel, A, more comfortable, but two, it's also going to make him feel like he has a little bit more pride. It's not like he's being lugged around. He's sitting on top of Hodor. It's a little bit more of a way of having Bran have some sort of pride. And Bran notes that he feels less shame, but doorways were always an issue, as sometimes Hodor forgot to duck down, right? He's so tall, he's going to hit his head on the doorway with Bran above him. Bran notes that the Karstark men were entering the keep, and some even looked at him weirdly and began to talk. Bran remembers his lessons from Lewin that men will look at you and mock, and Bran knew it and thought to let them mock, which is actually really important to understand, because I think as a kid, it's really hard to have that kind of a mindset. To realize you're getting bullied or people are looking down on you and not take that to heart, not to react to it. It's something that shows a lot of maturity from Bran, and I think that's a really important part to kind of point out, even though Bran doesn't always kind of follow that advice. As they passed the gatehouse portcullises, Bran whispered Summer to him, and that got some good payback on them, as the wolves' appearance sends their horses into a frenzy, causing many to fall and lose control of their horses. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just karma, right? These people are just making fun of Bran for no reason because of things that he cannot control, and they get a little bit of payback. But something else I do want to know is, like, yeah, right? This is the first time any of these people are going to have seen a direwolf How are their horses going to react to that? That's also something that's interesting, given that Robb is going to be leading their campaign. But that gets us into page 572. Bran knew it would wear off as soon as they were accustomed to direwolves, but they continue, Bran reminding Hodor to go to the Godswood. They continue, but Bran notes they had never seen Winterfell so busy. Everyone was at swordplay, or Mycon was hammering away. He had not seen so many new and strange faces, even when Robert had come. Again, this is really painting the scale of the situation, right? Like, even when Robert came with the royal party and the family, even now, there's more people. And this makes a lot of sense, given that you have all of the houses of the North coming to Winterfell. You're going to have tons of people, not only just the soldiers, right? Because we just talked about the soldiers, but talk about whether that's cooks coming with them, whether that's people that are going to set up the tents, squires, things of that nature. there's more than just 12,000 people. There's other people alongside of that as well. They eventually make it to the Godswood, and Bran is set down by the pool of water and wants to be alone, telling Hodor to go soak. Again, at the Godswood, one of the coolest parts of Winterfell is there is this guest house that Bran notes where there are 3 hot pools that were always steaming day and night. And this has kind of garnered a lot of speculation in the community as to what really allows that to happen, given that this is the deep north, like it's extremely cold at all times almost. How does this happen, right? Is it just some part of nature, or is there something else going on here? Hodor loved to stay here for hours, and Bran himself was feeling more and more drawn to the Godswood. He enjoyed the peace it brought, but also probably because of some Bloodraven manipulation. It just seems very odd that all of a sudden Bran feels comfortable going here. With the dreams that he had had, it doesn't really feel natural, but he also did not fear the Heart Tree anymore. But that gets into page 573. Bran notes that the eyes still followed him, but he felt protected by the old gods of the Starks watching him. He felt at peace to think, and lately he had been thinking a lot since his fall. He begins to pray to not let Robb go away, and if he does, to bring him, father, mother, and his sisters home safely, and to make Rickon understand. Again, Rickon is not someone that understands this. He's too young to understand or comprehend why all of his family is leaving him. I would feel like if I was a young kid, I would feel like my family is abandoning me. And that's really what kind of Rickon feels like. But Rickon has gone wild as of late. At the thought of Robb leaving for war, being angry and not eating, even punching old Nan, and the next day he went missing. They had found him in the crypts and slashed at men trying to get him with a sword of the old kings. And Shaggy Dog even took a bite of Mycon's thigh. Only Robb was able to settle it. Shaggy Dog had been chained up, and Rickon cried even more. Again, this just shows that the wolves connect to the personalities of their person, of their warrior, their Stark. And so I feel like this is interesting because another part of this is like Rickon taking the sword. Is this, again, letting the spirits of the old kings awaken? We just had a dream about this from Jon. Is that part of it? Right? Like, is that part of it? It's like, it kind of makes sense. It adds up around the same time. Jon had this dream in the last chapter, and Rickon recently in the past took this sword. Is that why these spirits were dancing? It's an interesting thing to think about when you look at Jon's dreams in the past. And Maester Luwin and Bran had argued for Robb staying, but Robb said he couldn't. He did not want to go. He had to. Bran thinks this is only half of the truth. Someone had to go, but he could send someone else, like Hal, Malin, or Theon, or any of his bannermen. But Robb notes Ned would never have stayed at Winterfell while men died for him. Again, Robb is completely right. He has to head this army. I find it very odd that Luwin agrees with this. I don't know if it's Luwin's bias towards just, he likes Robb as a son. He doesn't want him to have to go through this at such a young age and possibly die. But Robb has to. Robb's the one that called all these men here to summon their men and to die for him. To die for Ned. He has to do this. And I think the other part of it is like having complete control over your father's imprisonment, being able to save him in someone else's hand doesn't feel right. Because if you even think about all these military commanders, none of them are going to be as good as Robb, right? I think you look at all these different people. Some people are going to be too rash and run right into Tywin and die. Some people are going to be too cautious, and Robb knows that he can be the person that can be the best general possible. But that gets us into page 574. But these days, Robb seemed half a stranger to Bran as he became more of Robb the Lord. He wasn't even 16 yet, but he played the Lord. Many of them tested him in different ways. Roose and Robert asked for command, one brusquely and one with courtesy. Again, just testing how much Robb will allow, right? Like seeing how does he deal with people. Others tried to get him married to his daughters or anything like that, but Robb courteously refused all of them. But Bran notes he eventually all brought them under his will. And this is when we get one of the best moments of this chapter, one of my favorite moments of the story. Even when the great John Umber, who was as tall as Hodor but twice as wide, had threatened to take his armies home if placed in the march behind the Hornwoods or Kerwins, Robb had coolly said that when they are done with the Lannisters, they will come back for them, rout them out of their keep, and hang them for traitors. Umber had not taken kindly to this. Again, Robb just threatened to kill his entire family and house. Umber does not take kindly to this, who throws his ale and says one of the funniest lines of book 1. I love this line. "You must be so green you piss grass." He unsheaths his sword and his sons do the same. Malin tries to restrain him, but is flung aside. In one word, Greywind is on Umber, with Umber being put flat on his back and arising with his bloody hand, with 2 fingers bitten off. Again, it points to the idea of just how dangerous the wolves are, right? Umber is a huge guy, and even Greywind is able to put him on his back. And this is all about respect, right? Because right now, Umber does not respect Robb. He sees him as just another boy lord, kind of similar to like Joffrey or Tommen. And Robb has to put him in his place. Robb has to show that he is a Stark, that he is someone that can command and that just needs respect. If you step out of line, he will put you in your place. And that is important to understand, because when we get later on in the story, when things start falling apart for Robb, Robb is going to lose a lot of right now what is making him so well respected by some of his men, and how he's able to deal with other lords like Bolton and Lord Kerwin and all these other lords that are trying to get something from Robb. But that gets into page 575. Robb then states that Ned taught him it was death to bear steel against your liege lord, but doubtless he only meant to cut his meat. There was silence and unease, and Bran sucked in air, but then the great John says his meat is bloody tough, and begins laughing. Again, think about how Robb deals with the situation. He's very cold, he's very calculated. It reminds you a lot of Roose Bolton in this way, or even Ned later on, or even Ned, or how we kind of assume that he dealt with people. After that, the great John became Robb's staunchest ally, but either way, Robb came to him later that night saying he was afraid. He thought the great John would kill him, as he pushed Hal aside like a child, and he isn't even the worst. Roose just looks at him and says nothing, and all Robb can think of is that room in the Dreadfort where they hang the skins of their enemies. Again, great foreshadowing. But think about what we just talked about, right? Robb is having to rule kind of with respect, trying to balance fear and love. And so when you think about it, right, you have so many different elements that are playing on Robb's mind, because he has to deal with each individual lord differently. Like Roose Bolton is someone that rules completely by fear, not by love, by fear. And so when you have this image, if that's in Robb's head, think about everybody else that doesn't have the power of the Starks. Think about if you're a minor house near the Dreadfort and you hear stories like this. It's important to understand why the Boltons are such a prominent house and how they rule with fear. But another thing I really like to point out here is that Robb is still not Robb the Lord. He's someone that still can be very indecisive. He is someone struggling with his emotions. He's still human. It really calls back to Bran IV, when we see Robb and Bran embrace and they feel the struggles of the world at this point, and how Robb is struggling to be a lord. That is really kind of paid off in this moment as well. Bran says that is one of Old Nan's stories talking about the Dreadfort, but Robb is unsure of that, saying Lord Kerwin means to bring his daughters as cooks, but Theon says one day they will be in his bedroll, and Robb wishes that his father was here. And again, I find this interesting, because again, we see that one of his Theon thinks that, again, people are going to try to place their daughters in his bedroll to tempt him. And think about what ends up happening. It isn't a Starkman that does it, but it's the Westerlings. It almost happens in the same way, just given that Robb is more, again, broken emotionally, and it allows that to happen. So again, I think George has a lot of great foreshadowing to Robb's campaign later on in the story, in just this chapter. But of that, Bran knew all of them can agree on one thing, that Ned was missed. He notes all the terrible rumors he had heard about Ned, how he was in prison or dead or fled with Robert's brothers, or how King's Landing was being sieged, that Catelyn had hung Tyrion and Tywin was marching on the Eyrie, burning everything in his path. Again, it just shows the lack of information, right? There's no Instagram, there's no Facebook, there's no X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days. There's none of that. Right? They have to wait until they get news, whether that's from people bringing them the news by writer, which is very unlikely given it's the North, or by Raven. And even then, you're going to get information that sometimes is flawed. So I think all of that's important to understand. They don't know really what's happened to Ned yet. They have an inference, right? But they don't know. They don't know what's happened to Robert. So this is a responsitory army as to the news that they are getting. But that gets us into page 576. Even one of my favorite rumors that they get is that somehow Rhaegar was rallying his forces on Dragonstone to retake the throne. Again, people believe what they want to believe. That's kind of the moral of the story. All these people make up rumors because it's more interesting or this or that, and they want to believe things. But it is very interesting. But at this, they finally get the true news that came from Sansa's own hand. Bran could not forget his brother's reaction as Sansa tells them of Robert's death, Ned's treason, and how once married she could help Ned, telling him and Mother to bend the knee to Joffrey. Robb had damned her and asked what was wrong with her, and not even one mention of Arya. Again, I want you guys to think about this from Robb and Bran's perspective now. We've talked about this from Sansa's perspective in the past, but what about Robb and Bran's? They're getting this random letter from Sansa. They know that Ned did not betray Robert. That doesn't make any sense. Ned would never commit treason like that. This doesn't make any sense. You also are then backed upon the idea that there's no information of Arya. They don't know what happened to her. She could be dead for all they know, or in prison as well. And they want Robb and Catelyn to bend the knee after what just happened? This doesn't make any sense. And again, I think it makes a lot of sense why Robb would not be happy with her. But Bran coldly noted she had lost her wolf, her reminder of home and her own strength. Bran remembers how his grandfather and uncle and even his aunt had gone south, and Ned's men as well, but all had come home with bones, like Lady. And how the other wolves had already known before even they did. They were begun howling. Even when she was buried, they howled on her gravesite. There was an atmosphere of depression along the idea of Lady's death with the wolves. Almost as if they're all connected. Bran again is realizing that he may never see his family again. As if Robb went south with his army, Ned could be killed. And that's a very likely point. Like, this would be seen as treason, right? If Robb comes with his army south and starts coming towards King's Landing, it's seen as treason. The Lannisters then, given what they are saying is what happened, have every right then to kill Ned. And so Bran realizes that. That's very smart. They're not going to, because if you kill Ned, the problem is there's no chance of peace, right? Like, Robb is never going to bend the knee then. So at this point, Robb could still, there's still a chance of peace if Ned is released. Bran prays that if Robb must go, to keep him safe and for his men to also be kept safe, and even Theon. Again, we've talked about this already, but Bran and Theon do not have a good relationship up to this point. Like, Bran is not a big fan of Theon, but even Theon, he wants to be kept safe. But that gets us into page 577. He continues saying to help him beat the Lannisters and bring back Ned, and even Bran notes a faint wind. But at this, he is interrupted by Osha, asking if he hears them. Again, Osha is kind of talking about, like, the wind, right? The natural elements responding to Bran. But he notes how Osha was coming more womanly with her new garment and longer hair, but notes he had not seen her since they had taken her, but he knew she was working in the kitchens. A pretty nice job, given, like, her position, right? She was in this position of basically being a stowaway, living off of the land, and all of that. And now she has a pretty cushy job for the most part in the kitchens, outside of one part of it that's not so good. But yeah, I mean, not the worst outcome that could have possibly happened to Osha. But Bran asks what she is doing here, and Osha notes that these are her gods too, and Gage lets her pray if she exchanges sex for special privileges, which is, again, the downsides of her situation. And something else that I think is interesting is, like, we talk about the North a lot of times being the more honorable, the more, I don't know, morally better area of the kingdoms, but even here, like, we still see things like lust and all of that controlling people, and Gage seems to be really no different. And Osha doesn't exactly mind, right? Like, she's used to this. She's used to men, you know, having their way with her and all these things. Like, she was sleeping with Stiv, or it was more Stiv was sleeping with her, more or less. But, you know, And at this point, she basically notes that he treats her better than Stiv. She says that she will leave, but Bran wants her to stay. Bran is kind of intrigued by her statement of the gods. He asks her what she meant about hearing the gods, and she says, you asked them, and they are listening. But Bran says it was only the wind and leaves rustling. But Osha asks who he thinks sends the wind, as well as moving closer to him, only able to take small steps, as she is still chained. Osha notes they are sad for Robb, as he will get no help south, as they have no power down south. But I want you to think about this, because this is an interesting argument. Think about in today's world, whatever religion you believe in, part of that is going to be like, yeah, who do you think sends the wind? Who do you think sends sunlight? Who do you think sends rain? If you believe in some sort of religion, you're going to be probably thinking that god or those gods or whatever. So this is a great point from Osha, is like, if you're going to try to relate to Bran, and again, they both believe in the same gods, this is a common point, right? I think that's a really wise move from Osha. But another part of this is like, Osha says they have no power down south, which has factually been kind of proven true almost, right? Given that every time the Starks go down south, they either die or end up bending the knee, right? We have very few instances in which the Starks go south and the outcome isn't completely just awful for them, right? You think about some of the more recent ones, right? We have Torrhen, who, when he goes south during Aegon's conquest, he ends up bending the knee, which, again, the Starks and I think the North doesn't view that well, just given upon the fact that, oh yeah, they stopped being independent and having a king and all that, but they would have gotten completely decimated if they hadn't done that. That's a whole different discussion. But again, the North probably views that as not a great time when they went south. You look at other moments, right, with Cregan Stark, the House of the Dragon times. I'm not going to go too far into it because it's spoilers and all that for House of the Dragon, but that's kind of one of the few instances where it doesn't go badly. Then you have just more recent ones. So every time they go south, just things don't go well. Mainly Robert's Rebellion and the closer history of the Starks. So it just kind of is proved because of that. But then also she goes into depth in page 578, kind of about, again, all the trees have been removed down south. The old gods can't really see. Bran did not know what to think of all of this, and maybe she wasn't hearing right. He tries to listen, but only hears Hodor, who hears voices and forgot his clothes as he came rushing back to Bran. Osha notes that he has giant's blood, or else she is a queen. Bran says that Luwin told him that the giants, just like the children of the forest, were extinct. Again, it plays on this idea that you can't blame the Maesters for believing that they're gone, right? They haven't been seen in years, right? At this point, like hundreds, thousands of years. So it is like an idea. It makes sense that they would think that they're gone, but it's just, again, just questioning the Maesters on elements like magic, of things that they don't know, or the unknown. Again, shows you a little bit of that flaw in logic. But Osha tells him that Luwin should go beyond the wall. They exist. At even 12 or even 13 feet, the women giants end up mating with humans, getting the half-breeds like Hodor, which is very interesting to think about. But let's not get into that weird image. But she makes fun of Bran, saying he does not know what he means, or what she means, but he says that he does. He has seen dogs and horses doing it, but it made him uncomfortable. He tells Hodor to go dress. Again, you're talking about sex with a very young kid. It's a very uncomfortable conversation, and I'm glad George kind of moves it away from the conversation very quickly. That gets into page 579. Bran asks if there are truly giants, and she says yes, and much worse things. Men leave their fires and come back whites with blue eyes. Why do you think she came south with her party? Mance means to fight them, but he is mistaken. She has tried to tell Robb, Theon, and Luwin, but they would not listen. Again, we go back to this interrogation stuff that was going on. That's the reason Osha isn't killed, is because they want to question her. And so this is kind of what I would assume was going on during that point. But I think this chapter comes at a very pivotal and perfect moment. We just basically got the confirmation. I know the opening chapter also has the whites and stuff, but and the White Walkers, but last chapter's more recent. We've seen the White Walkers or the others staging an attack on the wall already. Like, we know this to be true. It's just these other characters have to be convinced. And even think about the situation that we're in. There is no situation in which Robb is not going to march south and march north instead. again, Robb does not know anything about these others. They are a fairy tale to him. He has no, like, he has nothing to basically prove that they are correct, because not only does Robb have to believe it, but then he has to convince everyone else in the North that they are a true and real threat. That's hard to do. And we talk about later on, even in the normal story in Winds of Winter, when we get there, how is Jon going to be able to do that, right? Is there going to be some sort of event that proves it to the world, or what's going to happen, right? So that's something that's interesting as we move forward in the story. She had tried to warn Robb again, but he had looked through her, and the great Jon had pushed her out of the way. She says once again, a man that won't listen can't hear, which is another great line, right? Because there's going to be times in the story where Robb does not listen to advice really well. Robb, and I think this is more of a Stark issue and more general, is communication. They really struggle to communicate, and that's very clear with things like Edmure and Robb's relationship, whether that's Catelyn and Robb. That's just a great line. And it's one of those things that we all know, like in hindsight of what's going to happen, we know that Osha's right, that Robb should have his army go north to the wall. But they don't. And that's because of personal matters. And that's one of the big, I think, themes of the entire story, is that because all these infighting things going on, because of these, you know, family issues, we get the others coming and attacking the wall and being a threat against humanity. Bran tells her to tell him. Bran tells her to, again, tell him what is going on, and that she will make, or he will make Robb listen. So she says all those swords need to be marching north, not south. He had meant to tell Robb at dinner, but he was not in the great hall, but with his lords making their final march plans. So it was left to Bran to play the lords for their sons and such. He felt every eye on him when Hal announced him. This gets us into page 580. Bran welcomes them to his fires and mead, but he notes after that he could hear the Karstarks whispering that they would rather die than live broken. Which gets us to our famous Bran name, but he does not want to be the Bran the Broken, as he tells Luwin. Again, we talked about this earlier on, that Bran says to let them mock him and things, but at the same time, it's still affecting Bran, right? It's harder to do the things he wants to do. It's just a very difficult thing, right? I'm someone that I try to avoid the negativity that is on YouTube, because it's people on the internet. Everyone can have their opinions and there's no repercussions to that, right? You're not saying it to someone's face. I can't see the person typing whatever they're typing and all of that. So people are more confident in what they say. And so I think this resonates a lot with the people that do things on the internet, because you're going to be criticized. You are. It doesn't matter how good your stuff is. There'll always be those outliers. And so that's kind of what Bran is struggling with, you know, trying to avoid all that mocking and bullying and, you know, negativity, but it's harder to do. He tells Luwin that he wants to be a knight. Luwin says he could be a knight of the mind and become a maester, but Bran wants to learn magic. Again, nice little on-the-nose foreshadowing of things to come. Bran tells him of what Osha told him, but Luwin will not listen, saying she tells better stories than old Nan, and that he will talk to her, but not to trouble Robb, as the Lannisters have Ned, not the children of the forest. Which is very true, right? Like, again, we've talked about this already. Robb is not all of a sudden going to just start marching north. It's just not going to happen. But 2 days later, he was on Dancer saying goodbye to Robb. Robb told him he is the Lord now and to listen to Luwin. Bran agrees miserably, as he did not know how to be a Lord and felt very alone. Again, we've also talked about this. Bran is watching as everyone he knows is leaving. Think about it from even this point of view. All the servants, all the people that are going to be accompanying the Stark men, Bran has watched now Ned take some of their stewards and serving men to go south, and now he's watching again as even a lot of those people's prior replacements are now going with Robb as well. A lot of the people Bran would have known are leaving. Robb hopes that Rickon can understand, as Rickon would not say goodbye, and says very interestingly that no one ever comes home. It almost feels like Rickon has more insight than everyone else here. Robb notes that he cannot be a baby forever. He is a Stark, but he promises to bring father home soon, and that mother will also be home soon as well. And oh, Robb, you sweet summer child, if you thought Catelyn was going to come home, you are wrong about that one. But at this, Robb leaves with the great Jon and Theon at his side, and Bran darkly remembers Osha's words. He is marching the wrong way. I wanted to warn him, but it was too late. Again, it's a very somber moment, right? It's Robb's last time at Winterfell. It's his last encounter with Bran. It's a very sad moment on a reread because this is the beginning of the end. And yeah, it's just a very sad moment for the story as a whole. But beyond the castle wall, Bran heard the sound of cheers for Robb, something that Bran knew would never happen for him. And that's a really somber feeling as well. Another great piece of writing that Bran is not going to ever get the things that Robb gets. Robb is someone that's always going to be loved by, whether that's the women, whether that's by just people in general. Bran is always going to be viewed as the character who's broken, as someone that people can never get behind or respect. And that's a really big point of it, because as we go on further in the story, think about the parallels between Bran and Bloodraven. Bloodraven was the same way. Bloodraven was not cheered ever as a hero. He was not someone that people adored, and so he had to rule with fear. Is that something Bran is going to have to do in the future? That's something that's going to be interesting to kind of discuss as we go further into Winds of Winter. Bran might be the Lord of Winterfell while his brother and father were gone, but he was still Bran the Broken, who could not even get out of his saddle without help. He looks around to see the castle almost empty, with just women, children, and old men. Hodor gives a sad Hodor, and Bran responds the same, wondering what it means. Again, a great way to end this chapter. It's a top chapter of the entire story. The amount of foreshadowing of the dark tone coming, the things that are going to happen to House Stark. It's a very good chapter. It's by far one of my favorites of book one. It's probably, honestly, it is one of Bran's best chapters in the entire series. And so thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.